America, welcome back to my channel. Today I'm doing my February wrap-up. I read 10 books this month, and I have a lot to talk about, so let's just get right into it. The first book I read this month is one that I borrowed from my library, and that was Gathering Darkness by Morgan Rhodes. This is the third book in the Fallen Kingdom series, and it's a YA fantasy series. Nearly everyone on BookTube has heard of this series or has read it, so I won't go into too much detail. But I would say that this book in this series is where the series really takes off. A lot of character development happens in this book, and so much story development happens in this third book as well. Cleo and Magnus, I would say, are the two main characters in this series, and they still don't like each other. They're fighting and at each other's throats every chance that they get in this book. But over the course of the book, Magnus realizes that he is developing feelings for Cleo and that he does love her. So there's a lot of romantic tension in this book and back and forth between Magnus and Cleo. We also get to see more development in the world building and the magic system in this world. Lucia also plays a big role in this book and becomes more confident when it comes to using her magic. I loved this third book in this series. I gave it 4 out of 5 stars. I really enjoyed it. The next book I read in February was Frozen Tides by Morgan Rhodes. I really enjoyed this book. If I thought I liked Gathering Darkness, Frozen Tides blew it out of the water. I gave it 5 out of 5 stars. It was amazing. The magic system in this series continues to develop in this fourth book, and there's definitely a villain in this book named Kion. Kion is the character pulling all of the magical strings in this fourth book and is manipulating everyone. Lucia is being a bitch to everyone. She's really evil when it comes to her actions, and she doesn't really care about anyone but herself. It also takes her a long time to realize that Kion is manipulating her, and the fact that it takes her so long to realize that, I found that kind of annoying. I was also surprised to learn that Lucia is pregnant with a magical child. Magnus and Cleo still have that back to forth banter going on, but in this book they realize that they both have feelings for each other, and I'm glad that they finally admitted that to each other and came together. I also liked the side storyline with King Gaius and his ulterior motives in this book. King Gaius or Gaius is on another continent, and he's doing everything he can to align himself with these other characters so he can take back his kingdom and stop what his son is trying to do so he can come into power once again. I would say that this book is my favorite out of the series, with all the character dynamics and the political intrigue going on. I gave this book 5 out of 5 stars. It was absolutely killer. Next up, I read Crystal Storm by Morgan Rhodes. This is the 5th book in the Fallen Kingdom series, and I gave this book 3 out of 5 stars. Overall, I was disappointed with this book, and I would consider this book separate from the rest of the series because the story goes in a different direction compared to the other books in the series, and it doesn't quite flow the same as the others. In each of the previous books, the plot built on the previous one, and that's not the case with this book. Honestly, I was disappointed with this new direction in the story. I didn't really like it that much because of it. Given what happened at the end of book 4, I assumed King Gaius would be dead, but that wasn't the case with this 5th book. Since the king realizes he can't get anywhere with trying to accomplish his own goals, he decides to help his son and to try to redeem himself in his son's eyes. I didn't really like that part in this 5th book. Also, in terms of the story, I didn't like that King Gaius' mother came out of nowhere, and she just supposedly has all these answers about the magical things in this world, and we learn that King Gaius wasn't always evil, that he was actually a nice king and a nice father before this magical incident happened to him. I didn't really like that these reveals and these events were just placed in the story for it to make sense. I feel like these developments in the story and the series overall just came out of nowhere, and I didn't like it. We had no idea who King Gaius' mother was or where she came from. I also didn't like the roadblock that Cleo and Magnus faced in this book, we find out there's the magical curse placed on Cleo, and because of this curse, it forbids them from getting together or staying together. I felt that this roadblock in their relationship was just contrived, and I felt like the author was trying to keep the love interests apart when they had already gotten together in the previous book. Even though I didn't like Magnus and Cleo's romance, another thing that I liked about this book was the relationship that had sort of developed between Jonas and Lucia. I liked their chemistry together, and it seems like Jonas and Lucia should be together, since Jonas has had heartbreak previously on in this series, so I'm glad he's found someone to like. The last thing that I liked about this book was the magical elements. The plot develops further as the characters discover that there are actually immortal beings within these crystals that they're trying to find, and a surprising twist happens with these crystals at the end of the book. The magical elements of the story were intriguing enough to keep me reading, but other than that, I didn't really like most aspects of this book. The next book I read was Immortal Rain by Rhodes. This is the sixth and final book in the Fallen Kingdom series. I also gave this book 3 out of 5 stars. Given the new direction the series took in the previous book, this finale was good for what it was. I enjoyed how everything was wrapped up in terms of the story and romantic relationships, but when I finished reading it, I was left wanting more, and I wanted the story to develop even further. Next up, I ended up picking up The Wrath and the Dawn by Renée Ahdieh. This is the first book in a YA fantasy duology. I gave this book 2 stars. I didn't really like it that much at all. This is a retelling of 1001 Nights. I don't know the original tale of 1001 Nights, so I took this book at face value. The premise of this book is that there's a royal king in a kingdom. He takes a new bride to his bed every night, and by morning, that new wife is dead. The main character wants revenge against the king because her best friend was one of the king's wives, and the king killed her best friend. So she wants vengeance against the king. The main character volunteers to become one of the king's new wives, and with careful social maneuvering, she's not killed the next day. As the story progresses, however, the main character finds herself growing feelings for the king. She's not really sure if she should give in to those feelings because she remembers what her main goal is, but her heart has other ideas. I didn't like the romance in this book. I felt like the characters were thrown together by circumstances, and because of that, it was insta-love. Also, the plot in this book was very slow. There was a slow beginning, and I had to wait until halfway through the book to even start becoming interested in the story. I also felt like the main character was just wrapped up in her infatuation with the king, and she let other characters carry her through the story. She was a very passive character, and I didn't like that. The king or the male love interest didn't interest me either, since he was just infatuated with the main character and there was not really any substance to him. The characters that I did like in this book were the main character's nursemaid and the main character's bodyguard. But since they were side characters, they didn't really play a big enough role in the story, even though I wanted to know more about them. As the story progresses, you're wondering why the king chooses to kill all these new wives that he takes to bed every night. And by the time the plot twist or the reveal came about in the story, I wasn't invested enough in the characters to care. There is a cliffhanger conclusion in this book, but because I wasn't invested in the characters or the story, I didn't care enough to continue on in this duology. The next book I read was Throne of Glass by Sarah J. Maas. This was a reread for me. I read this book and the first 4 books in this series back in April of 2016, but I wanted to reread this series and finish the series ever since the last book in the series was recently released last fall. I remembered a lot about this book in terms of the characters and the story reading it the second time, and even though I did enjoy it, I realized that this first book wasn't anything really good or really amazing, so I ended up lowering my rating. I'll put a link to my Goodreads review in the description, in case you guys want to hear more of my thoughts. Next up, I read Crown of Midnight. This is the second book in the Throne of Glass series. This book was also a reread for me. I remembered some things about the characters and the plot, but I forgot others. Originally, I gave this book 4 out of 5 stars when I read it the first time, and I ended up lowering my rating to 3 stars. Again, I'll link my Goodreads review in the description down below if you want to hear more of my thoughts, and I'll put a link to my original wrap-up from when I read this book the first time. Naturally, I ended up reading Heir next. This is the third book in the Throne of Glass series. I forgot a lot about the story and details in this third book, so it was like I read this book for the first time. I would say that this third book is leagues above the previous 2 in the series. New characters are introduced, and the story is much more developed in this third book. This book definitely had a different feeling to it compared to the other 2. Selena starts using her Fae powers more and just becomes a stronger character overall. The character development for her in this book was phenomenal. I also liked the introduction of Selena's cousin, Ahdieh, the friendship that developed between him and Cole and Dorian. I also liked Dorian's romantic relationship with a maid named Sorcha. Dorian is still adjusting to the fact that he can use magic. Sorcha helps him with this, since she's a healer, so she helps him find a way that he can control his magic. When I read this book the first time around, I remember being frustrated with Cole in this book, and I was frustrated with him again a second time. I didn't like some of his attitude when it came to Selena and magic in general. I also liked the character of Manon Blackbeak in this third book as well. Her backstory and just her storyline in this book intrigued me overall. It added another layer to this third book. I also read The Assassin's Blade. This is a bind-up of the Throne of Glass novellas. I would actually consider this a prequel novel to the Throne of Glass series, instead of just separate novellas, because the stories build on one another and they flow together nicely. In this book, we get to learn more of Selena's past and history, and we get to see some of the events unfold on the page that Selena mentioned in Heir. This book was a reread for me. I forgot mostly everything that was in this book, so I'm glad I read it. I did enjoy this prequel novel, but it didn't compare to my enjoyment with the main series, so I ended up giving it 3 out of 5 stars. And the final book that I read in February was What He Never Knew by Kandi Steiner. This is the third book in the What He Doesn't Know duet. Since this is the third book in the series, I suggest you read the other 2 before you get to this book. This book follows the romance of the guy that Charlie didn't pick in the duet. Reese Walker was the old flame that came back into Charlie's life. Reese Walker has experienced a lot of tragedy in his life. He lost his entire family in a mass shooting in New York City a few years ago, and he's still trying to deal with that. He's also dealing with the guilt of how he treated Charlie in the previous duet. He feels like he wrecks everything he touches. So Reese is trying to overcome all of that in his life, and he's having a hard time. He feels like he still hasn't gotten over Charlie, even after 2 years of still being in her life. This all changes when he meets Sarah Henderson. Sarah is the niece of Reese's boss at the prep school that Reese teaches at. Sarah has also had some tragedy in her life, and after dropping out of college, she's determined to get her dream of being a concert pianist back on track, and her uncle thinks that Reese can teach her. So Sarah becomes Reese's student. There's also an age gap between Reese and Sarah. Sarah was sexually assaulted by her professor before dropping out of college, and she's come to live with her aunt and uncle. Sarah's father also died unexpectedly a few years ago. So ever since that happened, Sarah has felt like her life has gone downhill. Even though Sarah wants to get her dreams back on track, she's afraid to play the piano because of what happened to her. So she's lost her connection with music recently. Reese starts teaching Sarah, and they eventually warm up to each other. Sarah and Reese have a strong professional relationship, that is somewhat a friendship. But as they get to know each other, they feel like the other understands them in a way that no one else ever has. Sarah has growing feelings for Rhys, but she isn't really sure if she should get into a relationship because she doesn't want that to distract her from her goals. Also, she hasn't really had any experience with romance, so she's hesitant to get into a relationship with him. Like I said before, Rhys thinks that he wrecks every relationship that he touches, so he knows that he shouldn't get into a relationship. But he can't help but start really liking Sarah. I really loved how the relationship developed between Sarah and Rhys. They definitely had a chemistry from the start, and their relationship develops so naturally, since Rhys is determined to get her back on track and he wants to see her thrive as a pianist. They have a strong natural friendship that develops slowly. However, there is angst in this book, because they both have feelings for the other person, but they're not willing to admit it. I was a little annoyed with Sarah's character in the middle of this book, since there was a miscommunication issue and she took it the wrong way. I was also annoyed with how some of the side characters were reacting to Rhys and Sarah's relationship once they found out. I felt like some of the other character reactions were out of character. The conclusion to this book was amazing. My only complaint about it was that I wish the old parts of Rhys's life and this new direction that his life took with Sarah would come together. Other than that, I really loved this book. I gave it 5 out of 5 stars. Those are all of the books that I read in February. Comment down below and tell me what was your favorite book that you read this month. I'd love to know. If you want to see more videos from me, I'll put some videos up on the screen in case you guys want to check those out. I hope you guys enjoyed this video, and I'll see you in my next one.